Joanie Hughes in Bank of Ireland. What I'm going to do over the next couple of minutes is bring you through the journey Bank of Ireland have been on. About a year ago, Bank of Ireland, through an absolute pent-up demand and asks from colleagues within the bank, set about understanding what flexible working could mean in Bank of Ireland, and actually how we'd look at implementing a change programme that would look to fundamentally embed and ingrain flexible working in Bank of Ireland. But I think before we start getting on in relation to understanding what that is, this was originally supposed to be a video of Robert Kelly, and I'm not too sure if anybody's seen it, but it's fantastic. It personifies the traditionalist and one of the many different types of colleagues within Bank of Ireland that we have. Bank of Ireland, maybe to give you context of it, there's 10,500 colleagues in Bank of Ireland. We're 235 years old plus, and with that comes wonderfully traditional history and heritage that we're all very proud of within the bank. But that history and heritage brings with it very much a traditional mindset, steeped in history and steeped in age-old beliefs. And again, something that really does keep us very, very proud. We're located in 5 countries, 10,500 colleagues, predominantly in UK and Ireland, and we're in 250 communities across Ireland, 64 of which we're the only bank in that community. So, you know, we're driven, and our purpose is driven to enable customers, colleagues and communities thrive. And we believe flexible working a year later actually will allow us enable not just our colleagues thrive, but our customers, our communities and society in general. And that's because we're one of many people that can, if we all work together, influence change and drive that passionate change that John O'Riordan is so passionate about. But we're at the very start of our journey. We're significantly behind the curve with an absolute passion and belief now, a year later, probably not the same belief a year ago, that we can succeed, and we will. Key differences between Bank of Ireland and a lot of the companies that have presented here today. For me, there's probably 4 key differences. We've got the traditionalists, we've got the Robert Kellys, who, you know, weren't interviewed to work remotely, and therefore the behaviours that you would normally expect of remote workers isn't culturally ingrained in every role profile within of employee and profile of employee within Bank of Ireland. Second are roles. Not all roles within Bank of Ireland actually enable flexible working. So, you know, we have 250 branches. We have to open up those branches at a time and a place that's fixed. So that doesn't enable flexible working. But funny, when we stood back and looked at this, about 65% of our roles do and afford a great level of flexibility that we're looking to prove out evidence and absolutely maximise within Bank of Ireland. Also the history and heritage. Most remote working. Yeah.
Do you mind using that one, because the other one is just a bit faulty?
Yeah.
And just pull it out. You know, like Elvis, just pull it off. Yeah.
Singer wasn't necessarily exactly what I was up here to do. So yeah, history and heritage, you know, with the 250 years, which we're proud of, that does fundamentally mean that we were coming from a different pivot point than a lot of the relatively new formed remote working and exclusive remote working companies. Fourth one is it's a choice. And actually, again, if you've 10,500 colleagues, some of which you've signed up. We have the millennials, we have the graduates who absolutely want, believe, and embrace flexible working. We have to respect the proportion of colleagues who have gone into work 9 to 5, Monday to Friday in an office environment for the last 20 years, and they want to continue to do that. We're not forcing change, we're enabling change through choice. And then the final one is, I suppose, unlike distributed companies, as a result, the solution that we need to deliver ultimately will result in a hybrid model. So it's not necessarily that we are focusing on, it's not necessarily that we're focusing on exclusive remote working, but we're trying to embrace and evolve the company where on an end-state basis there will be a proportion of our workers, if they choose to, who can work exclusively remotely. Moving on to the opportunity, and when I look at the opportunity, I think you have to say what the opportunity was a year ago. And I'll share with you in a couple of extra slides later on what the evidence is that those opportunities are actually there. Because when, again, we looked at this a year ago, we saw 3 key areas of opportunity: greater choice, colleague, health and well-being. And again, that I think has been spoken about at length over the course of the day. One area of focus that I think I'd like to further emphasize is the IND. So it does enable a much more inclusive workforce. And Bank of Ireland, we're not necessarily made up of the customers that we serve, and us having a focus on being more inclusive as an organisation in order to enable our communities and our customers and to serve them better is critical. The introduction of flexible working does absolutely drive a more inclusive workforce. And actually, when it comes to, while flexible working is for everybody, it does drive greater gender balance as well and helps bridge that gender pay gap, acknowledging the barriers encountered by a lot of people, but by females in some cases, are specifically addressed and removed by the introduction and embracing cultural adoption of flexible working. Huge Bank of Ireland organisational benefits, goes without saying, similar to everybody else. Productivity fundamentally has increased in companies who do this well. And the cost benefits, we have 280 locations across 5 countries. If we could have an impact of reducing our dependency on those, there's significant cost reductions. And I think most importantly, going back to our purpose within Bank of Ireland to enable customers, colleagues and communities thrive, the positive customer and societal benefit is massive. So we're in 250 communities, and what we're actively looking to do, and we're starting to evidence in some of the outputs from the pilot that we've completed, is that we want to embrace and encourage our colleagues to work in a location that suits them, where the role enables them to do that. And that's something that we can see nearly as a win-win-win situation for the individual colleague, for Bank of Ireland as an organisation, but most importantly for the communities and societies the society that we're in. And again, I have further evidence later on in relation to even solving the more macro issues within Ireland around property footprint and carbon footprint reduction, and how we all have a part to play in that, from an individual who decides to work remotely and not incur the carbon travel reduction footprints, to the organisations who decide to support them and enable them in a fully remote working environment. But again, critical to this opportunity is 12 months ago when we looked at this, huge scepticism. I spent 3 months talking to the C-suite executives within the bank saying, this is a great idea. A business case is coming out of my ears in relation to what the hard benefits were. We've now thrown that business case out because this needs to be driven by the soft benefits that colleagues incur. And the reality is, if we don't take a colleague-first approach, purely if you look at it from maths, if we don't take a colleague-first approach, you don't get the benefits. Bank of Ireland doesn't get the benefits. Our communities don't get the benefits. Society don't get those benefits. So we very much have taken this, thrown out the business case, taken it on, how can we maximize and remove the organizational, structural and cultural barriers that our colleagues encounter to maximize and improve flexible working. Moving on in relation to the journey, and as I said a year ago, we had a concept. First thing we did is we spoke to some of our partners, Vodafone, Microsoft, BT, all organizations who would be renowned for introducing flexible working and actively encourage remote working over the last probably 3 to 5 years. And acknowledging we're on a journey, and a journey on year 1 down, but with multiple years to go. And when you look at the fact that we have 10,500 colleagues and an organization that's steeped in history, actually what we're undergoing is a group-wide organizational change program. And it's fundamentally changing every individual, colleague by colleague, and the organization from the cultural and infrastructural barriers to try to fundamentally move the dial in a way that, as I said, barrier by barrier removes everything and anything that gets in the way. There's a change program that looks at not just people, but obviously focusing on what the technology and property enablers, their key dependencies in, I suppose, introducing, as I'd call it, the hygiene factors to a successful organization evolving and adapting. A lot of people have talked about technology and the key dependency in technology. Bank of Ireland don't have video conferencing facilities. So, you know, that in its own right, we're steeped in history, 235 years old, but we don't have video conferencing. Well, we will by the end of the year, but that is as a result of flexible working. Now, the benefit that will drive over and above flexible working is quite clear, but albeit we're a large organization, our technology, like a lot of other traditional companies, is hampered by the 175 systems that we have to get one view of the customer, and we're undergoing a fundamental IT transformation program currently within Bank of Ireland. And flexible working is a key and critical enabler and lever within that transformation program. So the standard things that you would expect from a new company become more difficult when you're an old and traditional company. We co-created, and I think when we looked at the journey from concept through to the delivery of a test and learn pilot, it took us 8 weeks. We didn't spend time iterating over what we outlined and drew together representatives from each of the divisions, and within 8 weeks did a straw man of what a pilot could look like. And we spent 5 months working with 1,700 colleagues to figure out and help co-create what the end state solution for a group-wide rollout would look. We then spent another 3 months after that, 1, listening and understanding to what the feedback we got, and 2, working damn hard and actually putting a lot of work in delivering a group-wide program that was on the back of what people said they wanted and helped us co-create. And in 2 weeks' time, we're rolling out to the wider group with some, I suppose, really good evidence that we are on the right path. If you look at the early results, 82% of the 1,700 people that are in the pilot adopted or increased their adoption of flexible working. That like absolutely blew out of the water our anticipation of what that take-up would be. The average weekly commuting time for those 1,700 people, 4.6 hours was the average weekly reduction. If you translate that, that's a day back in the life of every colleague who is involved in the pilot. Now translate that back to when they're working at home, the 2 or 3 days a week that they've chose to do so. They're buying the coffee, they're having their lunch, they're actually hanging out in the community that they live. They potentially get to collect their kids. They potentially get to train their sports club that they never had the opportunity to do. And they're ultimately happier. That work-life balance is fundamentally enhancing, giving back to them, also giving back to the organization, because we also measured productivity, and we asked people managers what was the productivity levels in the back of the enhanced flexibility. We saw a 45% increase in productivity, people managers, and 6% of people managers said that they saw a decrease. But again, that 45% versus 6 means that we still have somewhere to go in improving and developing the capability both of the individual who's working flexibly, also the people manager who's managing the teams remotely. And happier colleagues. So we asked colleagues, would they recommend flexible working to broader colleagues, and they got an NPS of plus 51. So more to do, but certainly early days are very positive. And I think what really drives me and motivates me to get up at the moment is what colleagues are feeding back. So I'm passionate about the fact that we're having a fundamentally positive impact on all colleagues within the bank. If you look at the quotes, better work-life balance, it allows you to be agile for the customer as well as yourself, greater trust in staff and everyone wins. It reflects more how people need to live their lives. I think that's down to, at the moment, it's a USP. We're a bank that's been around for 235 years. We need to evolve to the changing dynamics and society that we're in. And this is certainly one area that we see a huge opportunity to do so. And I think then finally wrapping up, the critical success factors, I kind of feel like everybody else has stolen my thunder today. But I actually think it just means that there's a consensus in relation to really what are the critical areas of success. Trust is massive. Trust and belief in yourself, because again, one of the other evidences that we had got from the feedback that we got is that there was huge support both by managers and senior leadership in a perception from feedback. 45% of colleagues said that they needed to prove that they were working when they were working remotely. There is that internal angst within your own self, not necessarily, probably further enhanced by the culture and the organization that they work in, but also from your own internal angst. So that bravery to take that first step is massive. And I think it's important to say, when you're looking at trust, there's kind of 4 different or 5 different audience groups. So it's trust and bravery by the leadership, so by the executive and taking that plunge without the evidence, because a year ago we took the plunge, but it's only recently that we got the evidence to prove that directionally everything, all those skeptics that said it mightn't work, we're starting to prove them wrong. 2, individual. You need to take that first step, be that person that's brave. It will be difficult. Change is difficult. But actually, as you work through change, eventually becomes part of what you are and part of the DNA. And that's what we're hoping within Bank of Ireland in 2-3 years' time, is that I'm not standing up here talking about a flexible working programme, because actually it'll be part of the DNA about how Bank of Ireland work. Third one is teams. So, team and the ability to manage and work as a team is tested more deeply by flexible working. And I think the people managers within the team is another core to colleagues, that a colleague has a choice to work flexibly. A people manager doesn't. A people manager who may have been steeped in history, working from 9 to 5 with a team beside them for 20 years, is now asked to do things differently. And the capability required to do that is paramount and of huge importance. Effective communication. How many times have we said there's no such thing as over-communication? I completely agree, but I think also it's really important, the 2-way communication and speaking to the skeptics. So as you get evidence that actually progress is being made, the importance of communicating that evidence so that those skeptics are slowly but surely getting proof and evidence that they need in order to accept and become part of the movement rather than resistant to a movement that's happening. Visible leadership, probably not something that was discussed much today, but hugely important, certainly within Bank of Ireland. You cannot be what you cannot see, and we really need to ensure that both at an executive level, but also at a middle management level, that there is role models that everybody can look up to. There's no double standards, and that there's absolutely clear sponsorship, because it's a journey, it's a marathon, not a sprint, and something that therefore needs the continued reinforced sponsorship by the organisation and specific individuals that will be critical to the credibility. And then finally, the technical infrastructural supports. Again, for most organisations who newly founded, it's just a matter of course that you develop what you need based on what's needed. it's much more complex in an organisation that's rooted in history and therefore has complex systems. And there are the hygiene factors that narrowly prove and support and evidence that that the organisation is taking and investing seriously in enabling colleagues, customers and communities thrive. Finally, I'd say, I suppose, and to quote John O'Riordan in his statement earlier today, if an organisation like Bank of Ireland that's 235 years old can do it, anybody can. And I'd firmly believe that. And I think together between us all, if we get more traditional organisations and the more progressive organisations to work together, the impact to communities and society could be massive. Thank you.